So to recap the first five Asias. The Friedrich Rebbe explains in his Maamar of Chagagul of Yud Beis Tammuz that Hasam Nafsheinu Bachaim Linos Lamed Ragleinu means that there's a higher level of life. The nefesh is essentially alive, and yet that's not enough to ensure that it won't be Lamed Ragleinu. Why? Because the natural life of the neshama, of the nefesh, is limited, and therefore Hasam Nafsheinu Bachaim, when the Ibishter places our soul in a life that's higher than nature, that's when we have the kayach not to falter. So Beis said, what does that mean? What's the different levels of chayas? And why is the regular chayas not enough to ensure that it shouldn't be lamet ragleinu, that our soul shouldn't falter, that our feet shouldn't falter? Also, what is the connection to Yud Beis Tammuz? So to explain that, he says we have to look at the pasuk in this week's parasha, Vayikach Kairach. Vayikach Kairach, Targum says is Vispala Kairach, Kairach divided. So what does that mean? Says Rabbi Yitzchak Berditchev, says Rabbi Elimelech of Lezhansk and Noam Elimelech, that it means that Vispaleg is al derech rekia amavdil, similar to the rekia, to the firmament that divided between water and water. What does that mean? Says the Tzemach Tzedek, that means, according to what the Zohar says, that the rekia amavdil is the idea of machlekes, of left against right. And that's the machlekes of Kairach against Aaron. That means that Vispala Kairach is connected to Rekia Mavdil, not just because machlekes in general is connected to the idea of Rekia Mavdil, but specifically Vispala Kairach, specifically the argument of Kairach, who's a Levi, who's from Gvura, against Aaron, who's a Kayin, who's from Chesed. And these two inyanim, meaning the general concept of machlekes and specifically his arguments against Aaron, are connected to one another. Why? Why was machlekes created on the second day? Rekia Mavdil, because the first day is chesed and the second day is gvura. Gvura is what gives room for machlekes. Like it says in Zohar that the yamin, the right, is perfection, and when you awaken the left, that's when you awaken machlekes. If that's the case, then Kairach's whole inyan is machlekes because he's from gvura. And that's why it says that Kairach and Adasai represent the idea of machlekes, and the fact that he's fighting against Aaron Chesed and wants to make Gvura the main thing isn't just because he wants Gvura rather than Chesed, but because he wants machlekes. But the Rabbi asked on that, how could that be if Kairach was Bikeachaya, Kairach was smart? How could it be if you're saying that he believes in the path of Avedis of Shem, of Gvura, then it makes sense. But if you're saying that he wanted machlekes to exist and to be machzik b'machlekes, how could he think that that's a path in Avedis Hashem? Also, what does that add? Rakia Mavdil is connected to the idea of Kerach. Kerach HaMavdil, as the Tzemach Tzedek says. So what is being added by the Targum of Vispala Kerach and by the Noam Elimelech, that it's Al Derech Rakia Mavdil, over the natural connection to Machlekes and to Kerach's name? So Neis Gimel, we said, to explain this, first we have to understand the idea of Rekia Mavdil, that the waters, it splits between, the firmament splits between the higher waters and the lower waters. Water represents pleasure. The higher waters is spiritual pleasure. Lower waters is the Tanugi Elamazeh, is the pleasures of this world. When you split between them is that the lower waters, the intent of the split is to make the lower waters desire to go to a higher place than they were before they descended. Why? Because the descent creates within them the desire, as it says, Mayim tachtenim beichin, the lower waters cry, and they say, Anan bi'inan lamahave kamemalka, we want to be in front of the king, and that desire causes them to go higher, even not just higher than where they are, but higher even than the higher waters in the Mayim Elyonim. And that's why on Yom HaShlishi, on Tuesday, it says twice Kitayv, once for Meleches Amayim, once for Melachtei Shel Yom. Theoretically, Melechas Hamayim is machlekes. That's the whole reason it didn't say Kitayv on Monday. So why are we saying Kitayv on Melechas Hamayim? The answer is that once they come down below and they desire to go and reconnect with their source, they're elevated to even higher than their source, and therefore then it's appropriate to say Kitayv. So then the Rebbe went on in Eis Dalet and said, according to this, we can understand why Kairach wanted machlekes. Kairach thought that the lower waters have an advantage for themselves because the sheirish of Gashmius is from a higher place than the sheirish of Ruchnius. And therefore he wanted the Gvuris should remain the main thing. The fact that the lower waters cry and say, we want to be in front of the king, Kairach thought, is only the fact that they wanted Giluyim, and Giluyim is mainly in Eilim Esel Yonim. But he said, but the Eilim Esel Tachtenim, since they come come from a higher source. So even without having Giluyim, they're actually higher. So therefore, he wants the Mayim Tachteinim to remain as Mayim Tachteinim, to remain below. But that Maila that Mayim Tachteinim have over Mayim Elyonim, what was his mistake? That Maila comes only lost of love, only when Mashiach comes. And that'll only be Nizgala, only be revealed as a result of the Tzimayin, of the Chukka, of the thirst that they have, that they want to go above. But on their own, they're taka lower. They remain lower than the Mayim Elyonim. And that's why it doesn't say Kitev until the third day, because on the second day you have the division of the waters themselves, but that doesn't yet be Megala, the Maila of the Mayim Tachteinim, and therefore you can't yet say Kitev. When Mashiach comes, will be revealed the Maila of the Mayim Tachteinim, and therefore when was the Kavana, when was that intent revealed? Only when the lower waters began to be thirsty, to desire to ascend on Yom HaShlishi. And similarly, the whole idea of revelation, the Sheirish of Chesed and Simsum and concealment, which is the Sheirish of Gvura, Taka, there's a Maila in Simsum, a Maila in Gvura, but that'll only be revealed, La'asid Lavai. And the intent in the Simsum, the way it is now, isn't for its own sake, it's only for the sake of the Gilui, for the sake of its desire to ascend. So the Rabbi goes on to say, the same is true in Avedis Adam, in a person's Aved in this world. Even though there's an advantage in Aved over the Aved of Torah mitzvahs. Why? Because when we serve Hashem in the physical world, in our normal ways, not just in holy things, so then we're bringing godliness into the matters of the world themselves. In bechol drachecha, in your ways, mikol makom nonetheless. V'chtei sheizke b'divnei reshus drachecha yeba'ifin shenyani elam liyifalu b'yirida chas v'shalem v'adrabba b'hem atzmam yira hashgacha pratis da'eyu. How do you ensure that you're able to do that? How are you able to go and deal with physical things and not have them draw you down, not have them schlep you down into the physical? And on the contrary, that you should see in them hashgacha pratis. In other words, da'eyu, you should recognize God within your physical matters. That's only achieved when a person ensures that he's doing it in the first place l'shem shamayim. That his intent in being involved in matters of reshus is in order that as a result he'll be able to be involved in Torah mitzvahs. And therefore, since his whole involvement in the matters of the world is for the sake of fulfilling Torah mitzvahs, therefore he limits his involvement as much as possible, and he's involved in it only as much as he needs to be. And therefore, even when he's involved in matters of the world, he sees revelation of godliness, he sees da'eyu. In other words, the same thing that we said with Chesed and Gevura, with Gilui and Simsum in general, that yes, Simsum comes from a higher source, but only when it recognizes that its own chisarim, when it lives for the sake of Gilui. And similarly, we said with Mayim Tachteinim and Mayim Elyonim, that yes, the Mayim Tachteinim, the Gashmias has a higher source, but when is that revealed? Only when they're Bachaim, when they're crying and saying, we want to be in front of the king, when the whole intent of Mayim Tachteinim is for the sake of the Gilui. The same is true with Torah Mitzvahs and Yanei Eilam. That yes, there's a maila in the Aveda, in Yanei Eilam, when a person's doing in Yanei Eilam l'shem shamayim, or even more so, when it's bechol drachecha da'eyu, when we see hashgacha pratis within the Aveda of the physical world itself. But when do we achieve that? Only when it's l'shem shamayim, when he recognizes that every time all his involvement in the physical world is with the desire that through that he should be able to be involved in Torah mitzvahs. According to this, we could also understand what we said before, that Chazal tell us that you shouldn't hold on to machlekes because it says but it's the lashon is that you should not, that you shouldn't be involved in machlekes, but you shouldn't hold on to it. In other words, mitzias machlekes atzma zeh shamayim atachtenim nivdelu b'mayim al yeinim u'b'riyah shenivra al yedei HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The existence of the division, of the separation, the existence of the fact that there's now mayim tachteinim that are separated from the higher waters, that's something the Eibishter created. And that's therefore not a problem. What was Kairach's chet? What was Kairach's sin? The fact that he held on to the machlekes. In other words, it's that he wanted the separation to remain. That the separation exists is fine, but the separation is supposed to exist with the complete and total involvement and desire to remove the separation. If you start enjoying the separation, you start wanting the separation to remain, then that's a problem. Kairach wanted that the lower waters should remain lower waters and don't even have the thirst to want to go above. That's where the problem begins. You shouldn't hold on to machlekes, cause it to continue to exist. If you could add the Kamaisha Havana Hakavana Bebrias Machlekes Rikia Mavdal B'Yem Hasheni Hibechdei She is Bar B'Yem Hashlishi Shaz Gamar Rikia Mavdal Nasatayv. Just like we said that the purpose of creation of Machlekes on the second day of Rikia Mavdal, the firmament that divides between the higher waters and the lower waters, is only that it should be refined on the third day when the lower waters want to be higher waters. That then the Rikia Mavdal, the separation, also becomes good. Al derech zeh the same is true with regard to the argument of Kairach. The intent, the way it was above, was that the purpose, the machlekes, had a purpose, but the purpose is that it should bring to a greater shalom, and that the shalom should be in a way that's higher than it was before the machlekes in the first place. As is explained in the Maamarim, why did Moshe involve himself? Why did he respond to Kairach and his people all together? And why was he running after them with words of peace? Moshe figured that just like the world was created and this third day Tiferes was able to come along and correct the problems of Gevura once it introduced into the Gevura, into the Tzimtzum, the desire for Gilui, the desire for Chesed. So al derech zeh yeh gam b'negel leKairach. Moshe assumed the same thing will be with regard to Kairach. Shemoshe shaya shlishi tiferes yivarer reisai. That it's not that Kairach is bad and shouldn't exist. He should exist, but he should exist, and then Moshe, who is the third, who is Tiferes, should refine him. He's the third child, among other things. It's referred to as Yaveh Tlisai, the third, because he's the third for his mother after Miriam and Aaron, right? So he should come along and be mevarer the Kairach and elevate him to his true intent. Why didn't that happen? It didn't happen because Kairach also has a Bechira Chavshis, and Kairach didn't want it. Since Kairach wanted to hold on to the Machlekes, in other words, the purpose was that Kairach should fight, but Moshe should bring Shalom, and that should actually elevate them both to a level that's higher than they were l'chatchila. But Kairach didn't want it, and therefore he remains below. He has to be destroyed and return to Tiferes' own nature. Al pize yesh levar ma shemeis vatargum shvika Kairach uvispala Kairach al derech rikia mavdil af sheshmei Kairach atzmei reimaz al rikia mavdil. According to this, we could explain the other question we asked. Why do you need the Targum to tell you the Vika Kairach is vispala Kairach and the name Elimelech to say that that's like rikia mavdil if Kairach's name already relates to rikia mavdil directly? Right? The word rikia comes from the keina Kairach. It's like the Kairach, which Kairach is the same word as Kairach. Shmei shel Kairach melashin karacha shel yano pilug meira lateva shalin shayaneitel machlekes shenivra al yidei HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Yes, Kairach's name already relates to the idea of rikia mavdil, but that's the way it's supposed to be. Kairach, from the word of karacha, of division, because he has a nature to want division, but that's the nature to want division that the Eibishter created in him, which is to want division, and as a result of the division, you'll then have an even greater peace, and the peace will be even higher than before the division. The way the Eibishter created it in Kairach. V'zeu ma shemechadish hatargum unklis. The v'yikach keirach u'vispale keirach. But that's what targum unklis is being mechadish. The v'yikach keirach comes to the word vispale keirach. He divided. And as we said, that's al derech rekiah mavdil. That's like the firmament that separates. In other words, not only is the nature of keirach naturally relates to the idea of machlekes, but that's machlekes the way it's supposed to be good. Division, which is for the sake of reuniting on a higher way. But this is but vispale keirach is that he chooses machlekes, and that's how derech. And that's saying that al derech rekiah mavdil shenivra kadosh baruch hu, even the mice of machlekes keirach still could be positive. Not only is his nature for machlekes have the ability to be positive, his action of making machlekes against Moshe Rabbeinu also has the ability to be positive, even though it's already b'rtzeinu b'bchirasei, because it's still vispale keirach al derech rekiah mavdil is al derech rekiah mavdil shenivra yidei kadosh baruch hu. It's still similar to the separation that the Eibishter created, which is for the sake of a greater ascent. Just like the intent and creation of Rikya Mavdil was so that it should then be refined, that it should then be elevated. The same is true of Vispala Keirach. That the Eibishter's intent in Keirach's actions, in Keirach's Machlekes, was also that it should bring to higher Gilu, that it should bring to higher refinement, that Moshe should bring about a peace that's even higher than the separation. The problem was just that Keirach chose not to take that on, not to accept it. So what did we explain in Eis Vav? Basically, that the problem with Keirach isn't that he's making machlekes, because machlekes could also be a purpose. What did we learn from Keirach? That you're not allowed to be machzik machlekes. In other words, you're not allowed to hold on to it to keep it going. Because if Keirach had made a machlekes and then Moshe Rabbeinu refined him and elevated him, it would be like the Eibishter creating the Rikiyah Mavdil that separates the lower waters and makes them lower, but then they have a desire to become higher, and that reveals within them their source, which is really from an even higher place. The problem is, and that's what the Targum adds, not only is the nature of Keirach one that has the possibility of positivity, even the actions of Keirach had that possibility of positivity. The problem was that Keirach chose not to accept Moshe's attempt to refine him, and therefore he descends below. Therefore, he actually leads to true separation. Zayin v'yesh leimar, and you could say shasiba lazeh shekeirach ta v'chashav shekavanu b'rikiyah mavdil yavdal ha'atzmo. What's the source of Keirach's mistake? Why taka does he think that the purpose is for the separation itself, not for the sake of wanting to then reconnect? Why? Because he didn't have bittul. What does bittul have to do with this? Because we said before the session, it's part of little shekavanu b'zeh shemayim atachtenim nivdul l'mayim elyonim v'yerdu l'mata. We said before that the reason why the lower waters were separated and descended below was that as a result will be introduced to them a desire to ascend on high, and that'll be an even greater elevation than they would have had naturally, than the Mayim Elyonim have. But how does that happen? That they descend below but don't get comfortable below, and they descend below and use that descent only to increase their thirst to be above. The only way to do that is by uniting two opposite aspects. If you look at it from the perspective of chesed, so then it's not that Mayim Tachtenim are higher. On the contrary, Mayim Elyonim are higher. Gilui is higher. Chesed wants Gilui. Chesed wants to reveal. From the perspective of Chesed, the best thing is Mayim Elyonim. The Tanugim and Yanim Ruchniim, where there's Gilui Elokus, and since there's Gilui Elokus, everybody's connected and everybody's good, and that's all they want. So from that perspective, you don't want there to be a lower waters, because the purpose is in the higher waters. Mitzad Gvuris, and then if you look at it Mitzad Gvura, then the Maila isn't in Mayim Tachtenim wanting to be elevated, it's in the Mayim Tachtenim themselves. The advantage from the perspective of Gvura is since the root of Mayim Tachtenim is revealed as a result of the tzimtzum, so all it wants is the tzimtzum. It doesn't want the thirst to go on high, because it wants the tzimtzum, because that comes from a higher place. From the perspective of Gvura, There's nothing wrong with the Mayim Tachtainim. There's no reason for them to be uncomfortable. They should be happy in Golus. They should be happy with Tzimtzum. They should be happy with Helam V'Hester because that's a higher Shadish. So there's no reason for them to want to go leave their Metzias and go above. Where does it come from that there's the intent that we said? The intent in the descent of the lower waters is that they should descend, but as a result of the descent, it should awaken within them a thirst to ascend. That's not shaykh to chesed, because chesed is happier with the mayim elyonim, and it's not shaykh to gvura because gvura is happier with the mayim tachtainim. Where do you have the mayim tachtainim but that they want to be mayim elyonim? That comes from Tiferes. Kavim say the middle kav. Which unites the opposites of Chesed Gvura, of the advantage of Gilui and the advantage of Tzimtzum. So therefore you have a Tzimtzum, you have a Hester for the sake of the Gilui. That there should be an inclusion of the left and the right. Since this whole idea of Iskalos comes from what? Comes from Bittel. Kairach wasn't bottled. If Kairach wasn't bottled, so it didn't resonate by him, this idea that the lower waters should want to be higher waters. Because he figures either there's a mile in the higher waters, or like he thinks there's a mile in the lower waters. But there's no reason for the lower waters to need to desire to want to be higher waters. Same as we said before, that an Avedis Adam, this represents the Aveda of Teira Mitzvahs and the Aveda of Kol Masech L'Shem Shamayim, leading to B'chol Drachecha Te'eyu. So the same is true over there. Even though he knows that there's a great advantage of B'chol Drachecha Te'eyu, in other words, there's a great advantage of the actions of the physical world, knowing godliness, seeing Ashkacha Pratis in the physical world, and forget about Torah Mitzvahs. But yet we said, how are you supposed to approach it? Kol Masecha Yilishim Shamayim, that Mikol Makam Yekol Iske Binyane Elam Rakim Say Bishul Kiyam Torah Mitzvahs. Nonetheless, we said your involvement in them should be with the desire that they're for the sake of Kiyam Torah Mitzvahs. But how? If there's a mile in Bechol Drachecha, so why don't you start doing Bechol Drachecha only? And it's not for the sake of Kiyam Torah Mitzvahs. So the only way you're able to keep those two conflicting elements together, is only when a person has bittul to do what the Eibishter wants. If he's going to do his aveda in order to slake his own thirst, he wants gili elokus, he wants revelation, he wants spirituality, he wants to accomplish things. So then what's he going to like? He's going to like more. You're accomplishing so much more, seemingly. Ella, but if you're not approaching it from that perspective, but rather he's dedicated and completely ibrigigem in order to fulfill the will of the Eibishter. If that's the case, it doesn't matter to him, the revelation, that he should know Elokus in Yanei Elam, because what he wants is to do what the Eibishter wants. So yes, spiritually he might accomplish more in Bechol Drachecha Deyu, in being involved in the physical world, because in that, if he knows the Eibishter in that, he's achieving more. But that's not what he's looking for, achievement. He's looking to do what the Eibishter wants. What does the Eibishter want? Torah, mitzvahs. That's what the Eibishter gave us. That's the Ratzon of the Eibishter. When a person does this, when a person isn't interested, he has bittul, he's not interested in his own spiritual accomplishments, and which he'll accomplish more in B'chol Drachecha De'eyu, but rather what he's interested in is fulfilling the Ratzon of the Eibishter, and therefore all he wants while he's involved in the physical world is, I wish I didn't have to be, I want to do everything just that I should be able to fulfill Torah mitzvahs. When he does that, then his Aveda Taka achieves its purpose. Then it's also fulfilling Ratzon Hashem, because the Kol Masecha L'Shem Shamayim is what ensures that we're able to actually achieve B'chol Drachecha De'eyu. Okay, so the Rebbe explains in Zayin that this is the Kairach made the mistake and didn't want the Gilui or didn't recognize the need for the lowly, for the Helam, to desire a Gilui. Why? Because he didn't have Bittul. Because the only way to understand and to reconcile those two conflicting aspects of Chesed and Gevura is when a person has Bittul and therefore is able to achieve Tiferes, which achieves the Skalulus, which achieves unification and combination, harmony between the two conflicting aspects. Similarly, with Bittul, if we're interested in our own spiritual accomplishments, then the person's going to want more the involvement in the physical world. But because that achieves more. But since we're supposed to want only what the Eibishter wants, so therefore he's able to have kol masecha yilishem shamayim, that he's involved in the physical world, but his involvement in the physical world is with the constant desire not to need to be, because all he's doing it for is so he should be able to fulfill Torah mitzvahs. So this explains the original pasuk that the Eibishter placed our souls in life, but didn't cause our foot to falter. Because when a person's involved in Torah mitzvahs, he's on the level of a head. When he's involved in the physical world, he's the level of a foot. What ensures that we should be able to be involved in the physical world and still not be lamait, not allow our foot to falter? That's only possible through Hasam Nafsheinu Bachaim, through the special life that the Eibishter places us within, higher than the natural life of the neshama. Because that life is higher than the life of the soul itself, even from the highest aspects of the life of the neshama, which is that it's chai ba'etzem, it's essentially alive. Because if I'm approaching life from the perspective of my own life, even if it's the life of the soul, even if it's the life of the soul, the way the soul is essentially alive, but nonetheless, there it's possible that I won't have bittul, and therefore my desire will be for the Gilui Elokus that happens within matters of the world. But if the person reaches the level where his involvement in the physical world is for the sake of the revelations that he'll achieve in the physical world itself, it's not that he's doing this in order to do something else, in order to filter mitzvahs, but rather he's doing this for the sake of the Gilui Elokus that happen within the physical world itself. If he's involved in the physical world just for the sake of the physical world itself, not l'shem shamayim, not for the sake of kiyamat Torah mitzvahs, meaning he gets involved in appreciating the Maila of Helam and Hester itself, then it's possible that his feet should falter, because his involvement in Yoni Rishus could end up being for the wrong reasons. How do you ensure that his feet don't falter? Through ensuring that his involvement in matter of Rishus is l'shem shamayim, meaning for the sake of kiyamat Torah mitzvahs. And how do you do that? That comes as a result of the life that the Eibishter places us within, that's higher than the natural life of the nefesh. And you could say that what's the keli for that? The keli is bittul. Because bittul is what allows the life to transcend its own limitations, and that life that transcends the limitations is what's able to ensure that because you end up with chesed, you end up with the desire for gilui, which is expressed in Tiferes. Because Chaim, that's beyond nature, is beyond any limitation. Through bittul, that you achieve through bittul, is beyond any limitation, and therefore, since they're beyond limitation, they're able to combine even things that are opposites. Chesed and Gevura, that even though he knows that maybe refining physical things is even a higher spiritual achievement, nonetheless he doesn't get caught up in that and get caught up in the physical world even for the sake of its elevation. But nonetheless, he keeps the focus on Torah mitzvahs, and his involvement in physical matters is only to bring him to fulfillment of Torah mitzvahs. Okay, so Neisches, he explained that this idea that you need bittul in order to achieve the higher level, the third level that unites, that the second is lower, but it recognizes always that that's for the sake of the higher. That's achieved through Hasam Nafsheinu Bachaim. The Eibush, they're giving us a new level of life that's beyond the natural life we were born with, and that has the ability, since it's beyond nature, it has the ability to unite the two opposites of Chesed and Gvura. You could say that this is the connection between Hasam Nafsheinu Baxayim and the Gula of Yud Beis Tammuz, because we know that through the Anhaga of Teva, through nature, which what is the whole idea of nature? When something repeats itself, it always continues in the same way. That's what's the point of that? Why did the Eibishter create nature? So that as a result, he shows this idea of Aniyah Vayleishanisi, that the Eibishter doesn't change, and therefore the world that was created through him also isn't changing. But that idea of Leishanisi, of not changing the way it's revealed in the natural order, is enclosed within the garments of nature. But through Nisim we draw down an extremely high revelation, which is beyond the physical world, which is beligvul, it's beyond limitation, higher than being enclosed within the world, and therefore it's through the Nisim that you're able to express within the Teva its Maila. So the root of these two things of Teva and Nes, Teva is Gvurais, the concealment of godliness, and Chasadim, and Nisim or Chasadim is revelation that allows for a complete recognition of Elokus. Because as we said, leading the direction, the way the world works under the process of nature is from Gvuris. The reason why, as we said before, the non-changing nature of the world is expressed within this idea of Teva, of the natural order, is specifically because of that. Because the sherish of Gvuris is higher than the sherish of Chasadim, and therefore what's able to reflect the Leishinisi, the unchanging nature of godliness, is specifically the way it comes from Gvura, because that reflects a higher revelation. But Nisim, the idea of a miracle, which is beyond the limitations of nature, is connected specifically with Chesed, because it's revelation of kindness. The idea of joining the left into the right is how are you reconciling both of them and bringing them both together? Normally you either have Smail or Yamin. How do you bring them both together? Is because the Gilui of Erin Seif Abligvul, of the infinite light of the Eibishter, which is achieved through Nisim, isn't in a manner of Shidut Ateva, of destroying nature, an even higher level of inclusion is when you have both together. In other words, nature isn't being broken by the miraculous, but nature remains nature, and yet you're able to see within nature itself how it's really miraculous, how it's really beyond nature. So that's combining the Chesed, the Gvura, and the Chesed. It's combining the Maila of the Tzimtzum and of the Gilui, of the Hester Helam and of the Gilui. And maybe you could say the Mashikasa B'Tanya Din Yichita B'Mitzrachim, who is Galus Elokus Ayidei Tzadikim V'Esis Meifsim, that when the Alter Rebbe writes in Tanya, that the idea that that the Eibishter saw the world couldn't be fulfilled within Midas Adin, within Gvura, and therefore Shita Bei Midas Rachmim, and where do you see the Midas Rachmim in the world? The fact that Elokus is now revealed through tzaddikim and through miracles. says, and a miracle that breaks nature isn't really shita b'midas harachmim, because it's still either or. It's either chesed or gevura. The intent in shita b'midas harachmim is mainly the miracles achieved through tzaddikim that are still enclosed within nature. Shitif by that it's actually a partnership between nature and that which is higher than nature. Because the miracles that are beyond nature is chesed, and that still doesn't get along with teva, with and that nature that the meifis is enclosed within is from gvura. Where do you have the ultimate miracle that expresses the combination of chesed and the gvura when it comes to merachmim teferes? In other words, that incorporates both of the opposites of chesed and gevura, and that's primarily expressed in a miracle that doesn't require shito dateva, the destruction of nature, but rather is expressed within nature itself. That answers in response to the third question, the final remaining question, which was what's the connection of Hasam, Nafsheinu, Bachaim to the Gula of Yud Beis Tammuz? According to this, it makes sense. Because the Gula of Yud Beis Tammuz, including even the beginning of the Gula of Yud Beis Tammuz, which happened on Gimel Tammuz, so it was an open miracle which is beyond nature. But nonetheless, it didn't require any breaking of natural laws. It was clear that it was miraculous because that didn't happen, that they would let somebody go under those circumstances. But nothing specifically supernatural took place. It happened within nature itself. Nature remained nature, continued to exist. Not only that, but even the opposition, the communists, remained in full strength. And even though they remained enemies and they still wanted to kill the Frierdiker Rebbe, they still weren't in any way removing their opposition. Nonetheless, not only did they not get in the way, but they ended up helping and using their strength to ensure the Shiur and the Gula, the freeing and the redemption. It's specifically through expression of miracles that happen within the laws of nature, that don't break the laws of nature, that you have the true combination, and it is scalulus of left and right. And that's what gives the ability later to each and every yid to nullify the distinction that exists between involvement in the physical world and kiyum ha'Torah mitzvahs, that before we said they're two completely separate things, but through the Gula of Yud Beis Tammuz, that gives the kayach to each and every one of us to reveal how there aren't really two separate things. Why? Shegam binyani reshus yarat Torah mitzvahs, because we have the ability to ensure that that in matters of reshus, also in permissible matters of the physical world as well, there's able to shine the light of Torah mitzvahs. This becomes the close preparation for fulfillment of the promise. That the glory of the Eibishter will be revealed, and all flesh will see together that the Eibishter is talking. What does that mean? That the physical flesh will also see godliness, like we said before, that the teva doesn't have to stop being teva, it just has to be revealed within the teva, the kayach that's higher than teva. The chol zeh nasa al yidei ha'isas v'ha'meifsim shel yidei tzadikim. All of this happens through the ISIS and Meifsim, through the miracles that are achieved by tzaddikim, because they're the ones who draw down into nature the revelation of godliness that's higher than nature, as happened at that time by the Gula of Yud Beis Tammuz, that they were able to celebrate within the Golus, within the Menagid itself. So basically, Tess said that the Sam Nafsheinu Baxayim, the Eibishter reveals a life that's even higher than Agbola. So not only, like we said in Eisches, does that give the bittul that allows for this galulus, but it also represents the idea of the sherish of Nisim and the sherish of Teva, which is Chasadim and Gvuris, and the way they are brought together. How are they brought together? When you have Nisim that don't break nature, because then you're revealing within nature itself the shitif by midas harachamim, the higher aspect that unites nature and higher than nature. And that's Hasam Nafsheinu Bachaim connected to Yud Beis Tammuz, because the goal of Yud Beis Tammuz wasn't in a manner of an open, although it was an open miracle that this took place, but it wasn't in a manner of breaking nature at all, because the Menagid remained, and in fact remained even in his Isnagdos, and therefore that gives the Kayach to each and every Yid that we could also achieve within nature that which is higher than nature, and draw down into Teva, the Gili Elokus that's higher than Teva, just as it was by Yud Beis Tammuz. And Rabbi connects this Maamar specifically to Gimel Tammuz. In other words, essentially he seems to be saying that yes, there's a Maila in Helam, where Gimel Tammuz was the day that would become the day of Helam V'Hester, of concealment. And yes, in a sense, the greatest Maila is the last generation of the Geula, is bringing Mashiach in the physical world, is the greatest Helam and Hester, when we're able to achieve the greatest things. But if we become comfortable with that, and we're happy with the lack of Giluyim, the lack of revelation, we're comfortable being the ones who have to have the Kayach of Mesiras Nefesh, then we're missing the whole point. Because the only way that we could achieve the Maila of what it means to have a Helam V'Hester, the ability that it gives us to actually achieve the greatest Giluyim, is when when we recognize how bitter the Golus is, when we recognize how bitter the Helam V'Hester is, how bitter it is to need to be in such a situation of Helam, and we desire the Giluy, that's when we're able to reveal the Maila, the Shadish of the Helam V'Hester itself, and come to a place that it achieves the ultimate purpose, which is to achieve an even higher purpose, to bring about the Gula Amitis Vashlema, when we'll have the Giluyim, and we'll be Kame Malka, we'll be in front of the king, we'll have even higher than Giluyim, but that'll be revealed V'ro Kovasa Yachtav Kifi Hashem Diber.